Hey, what's up, dudes? Me, Mr. Aaron here, the Aaron History Buff channel, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be covering out something else of a different topic, and today we're going to be looking at your U.S. history about the establishment of the U.S. Constitution and its Bill of Rights here. But before we get this video, I know that some of you guys might have watched also one of my last videos in the American Revolutionary War videos, where in the last part where I talked about the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the separation of powers. But today I thought, since today is like kind of like Constitutional Day, which is September 17th, I thought we might as well take a look at this presentation that I also created and check out the history of both the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, as well as separation powers and the forms of government. So before we get into this, if you guys haven't yet, please be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you're new. Don't forget to comment and turn on that bell notifications. That way you get notified by every video that I'll be posting in the channel. And yeah, let's get to it. Alright, so let's get started. So, what is the U.S. Constitution? So, basically, after the American Revolutionary War and with the result of the Battle of Yorktown in 1781 and the Treaty of Paris in 1783, that basically then afterwards that the United States, who was okay, to the U.S. Basically then they had this written down the Constitution, which became the supreme law of the U.S., establishing the structure of federal government and guaranteeing the rights of the people and the states. It was written back in 1787 in September 17th until it was then ratified in 1789, and then where that's within the same year. Then on April 30th, where George Washington would then later become the first U.S. president. That was then replacing the prototype of the Constitution known as the Articles of Confederation, because the Articles of Confederation, if you guys remember watching on my last videos of the where we did the final part of the American Revolution, basically the Articles of Confederation, there was no like president, there was no judicial branch, it was just Congress, yeah, the legislative branch, and they can only basically coin money and also said coin the money and arm the troops, but they could not do things like paying taxes here, which means that basically because without paying the taxes, the country would then get itself into a huge amount of financial debt here, and that's why they would later led to events such as Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts in 1786, where they were then about to revolt and get into the new constitution. So that's why the framers and the founders are getting back to the drawing board and created the U.S. Constitution that we still have today. That it's adding now the president, the other cabinets, such as the not just the legislative but the executive and the judicial branches here. And the legislative branch is basically like Congress that was divided in two. So we have their Senate, which is made of 100 senators that were divided into two members in the Senate, no matter how much the population is size, and also basically the House of Representatives, which would be then divided up into 435 members. Today, that would be California state is about for representatives they're based on population. That would be California would be 53, whereas states other states like Wyoming gets 8. And so, basically, and then where you have also the president, which is basically in the executive branch, whereas we who have the president who basically runs into the country and makes the laws and legislative edition and such. Then you have the vice president, who would then become also known as the president of the Senate. And you also have many of the cabinet members, such as the Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of the Interior, Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Homeland Security, and you got others Secretary of War and Secretary of Agriculture, and so on and so forth. And they basically give out jobs and ideas that they thought to collaborate with the U.S. President to think of the ideas and such, and give out the maybe executive orders and all that signed if it's and also like finally we have also the judicial branch, which is made up of the Supreme Court and all the other like federal courts, and where they're basically like, and where they basically, if you get accused of a crime, you then like go to different courts until you finally met up with the Supreme Court here, until they get the judge to do your crimes here, and basically whether that can be like described as being constitutional or unconstitutional, even those are the committed crimes, is to the speedy and a jury trial here, and yeah, so then basically, and it wasn't until later on that the founders then later also added later on that we'll get to is the Bill of Rights that would later guarantee all the freemen. They will include like basically 10 amendments that guarantees all the rights and the freedoms of many Americans that are still live to this day here. And like basically, it was also during around that time that was also giving checks and balances, preventing like basically one government from being like way too powerful. And the way they did this is like basically, for example, is like that one, if for instance, is like where you get the legislative branch that basically grids out makes out the new law here, and the president can basically in the executive branch would either veto or either accept the law. And if he vetoes this law, then Congress can basically give them a two-third of the majority vote here to unveto it. But then it would then like later go to the Supreme Court that would basically determine that if this is like basically unconstitutional or if it's constitutional. If it's unconstitutional, then it could basically get thrown into the trash here, or it could basically, like it could undermine and basically undo, like basically going through to what is basically making through what is constitutional that matches to the U.S. Constitution. And so, and basically, they basically had fun this before because there were a big before this. The founders had been debating on one each other of what type of federal government that we could see use it. So why not just basically add both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and then they both agreed. Such as like you have like the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, who basically one on the side basically that championed that we should like basically they thought like basically that they have grown like the strong and federal government here. That's what the Federalists said. But then you have the Anti-Federalists who basically that they do not want to ratify the Constitution because then they thought like basically they unless if the people would guarantee a lot of rights and also to basically limit the powers of government. And that's why later like men like Benjamin Franklin, we have later men like Alexander Hamilton, Benjamin, and like James Madison, and basically also John Jay, who wrote down later all of the Federalist Papers of basically the strong powerful government and guaranteeing the rights and citizens, and to the Federalist Papers here before the ratification of the Constitution. That's why later men like George Mason here had came along and said, why not just basically give out all the amendments here to amend that's something which the government could not and can't or cannot do, and cannot restrict. So, and that's why all the framers that basically worked it agreed, and James Madison by that time already got to work here. He basically kind of ignored some, but he basically added a bunch of stuff that basically that kind of matches to the Bill of Rights amendments, such as freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and as well as also others like the right to bear arms. So, and like this way, the framers had then agreed, and they gave an electoral vote, and that's why they ratified and made the U.S. Constitution here. And so, yeah, and the Constitution today is made up of like 7 articles, and it's also made of 27 amendments, and it's also basically the framework of like how like the government is being like overrun, how it's being run over, and so on and so forth. And another way to also to like checks and balances is that Congress can also basically impeach the president for any crimes or like any misconducts, and as well as also they can also impeach also the to any Supreme Court courts and the members here, even though then later the president can basically also appoint new members into the Supreme Court too. And yeah, so and that's what basically what we're about. So let's go to the next. Oh, all right. So, what is the Bill of Rights? The Bill of Rights is made of the 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. It spells out the Americans' rights and in relation to their government, and why the Bill of Rights are important. Because the Bill of Rights is the 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. It spells out America's rights in relation to the government, and like basically, that the government or a leader should not like basically take away any of their rights. It guarantees civil rights and liberties to individuals. It's like freedom of speech, press, and religion. And so, and what's the historical context? The Bill of Rights was added and addressed to concerns about too powerful federal government to reassure citizens that their basic rights would be protected, and a solution to limited government power and protect the individual liberties through the Constitution here. And so basically, yeah, to basically guarantee the rights of people and Americans that basically that do and like basically that the government should not get basically get involved here. And also like basically the works of government also here the Constitution is basically also about the rise on basically American lives here, like government of agriculture, interior, and homeland security and safety, but also others like relying on the as well as relying the profits and and also relying on the economy, basically how governments basically through governments work too. And so here are the first the 10 amendments here. So we have the First Amendment, which is basically is the right of freedom of speech, expression, and assembly, religion, and petition. And basically, we can talk and protest and like basically our government if we needed to. The Second Amendment, which is one of the most controversial amendments to the today, is the right to bear arms here, because this is basically dates back also to the American Revolutionary War, that basically like also and that you but now that like basically you have the right to basically to have a gun and to protect your personal property. But this basically constitutes but it is that basically gets also limited because of like basically that you basically heard of the news like basically of people like having also around school shootings around into the U.S. So that's why they're basically the U.S. government and such that we're trying to limit also the Parliament Amendment through the Second Amendment. And then finally, so next we have the Third Amendment, which is also known as the Quartering Amendment, which states that soldiers are no longer housing anyone's house at homes, because this also dates back to the American Revolution, where like where the Quartering Act, where British soldiers had basically need to court and basically house basically into British homes within the American colonies. And then you have the Fourth Amendment, which is the right to search and seizure, which meant that the police cannot just simply like break into your home without a search warrant. Then you have the Fifth Amendment, which you don't have to like basically like this is more like the like you've probably maybe heard of the phrase "I plead the fifth" in probably like movies or TV shows, in which they are actually talking about the Fifth Amendment, which basically states that you don't have like the right to have to take the stand, even if you don't want to like basically get yourself incriminated. Then you have the Sixth Amendment, which it means that if you are accused of a crime, then you have the right to attend to a speedy and a public trial, and to attend an impartial jury, protects the rights of the accused in criminal prosecutions, and the right to a lawyer, and have the right to take a stand too. Then you have along with it, you have the Seventh Amendment, which are civil cases and lawsuits based on disagreements with people or businesses that have right to basically decide by a jury in a federal court, where 12 impartial peers decide that you're innocent or guilt in a courtroom, even if it means if a judge has to do the job all alone here. Then you have the Eighth Amendment, which prohibits the use of excessive bail or fines and cruel, unusual punishments in criminal trials. The Ninth Amendment, basically, it's also known as like the non-rights amendments, because which states have all the rights that are not listed in the Bill of Rights belong to the people and not to the government. Like it's basically kind of like just basically anything, like reading a book or going out for a walk or having coffee with friends or like playing video games. even though that's not like exactly listed in the into the Constitution. Then you have the 10th Amendment, which is the powers that are not given to the federal government that are reserved to the states or to the people. And yeah, so and I have a video basically that I've done also research and also maybe presentations, also make this presentations all about the 10 amendments within the Bill of Rights. So if you guys want to check it out, I highly recommend to watch you guys this video. It's made by the by TED Ed. It talks about a guide to the Bill of Rights, so about all the 10 amendments to the part of the U.S. Constitution. So that's why I'll put a link in the description down below in this video. So here we go. All right, so let's go move. So, what is the conclusion of the Bill of Rights? So like okay, so the enumeration of the certain rights in the Constitution does not like basically deny or disparage the other rights that the people retain. It was also made to help America make also like a great place for many Americans to live here. And what did the Bill of Rights ever succeed? Some said that the Bill of Rights has triumphed because it protects critical and significant rights, freedom of speech and religion, and the fair trial, and the assembly, and so on and so forth. But the U.S. Constitution has been expanding, like also been over time, also too here, and basically give the lives of many peoples that live in their daily lives at their homes or their established schools or businesses and their courts and so on and so forth. There that many basically like many really regular lives that many now people had lived together into today into America, that they gave their freedom of speech and or their rights and that are not taken away by the government. And so here is also the total of the 27 amendments that are like not that are not a part of the others are not part of the Bill of Rights. Like Amendment 11 is about lawsuits that are against like the states. 12th Amendment is also the election of the president and the vice president that I mentioned, also about establishment of the 12th Amendment by the of the 1824 election between like Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, and William H. Crawford. That basically, when it was given to House of Representatives of this amendment, dedicated to this amendment, that they chose controversially, which is later John Quincy Adams. Then you have the 13th Amendment, which which was in 1865, that they later abolished slavery throughout the United States, and except for prisoners who are still incarcerated after the U.S. Civil War. And then you have the 14th Amendment, which is due process, equal protection, privileges of the citizens. The 15th Amendment begins that rights are not denied because of race. And 16th Amendment is called income taxes. And 17th Amendment, that election of senators. And the 18th Amendment, which was also basically, which is about the time of the Roaring Twenties. It was about prohibition here. That basically those were down the Roaring Twenties in the America. That basically was like basically the ban and of the consumer and the consumption of both alcohol, because the American government thought that basically to ban any sort of alcohol, because of like that way it can end like basically crimes and basically and destruction, as well as ending child abuse, and also basically make Americans more happy again. And that they thought it might work, but it turns out it created a lot of more crimes than ever before here. And like it basically also makes that the lawmakers by that time were also drinking alcohol in themselves. And during around this time, that Al Capone was like basically one of the most infinite, like basically of the men of mafia men of who the notoriety of the during around the Prohibition era, and that many there was increasing really high and of like people drinking alcohol, until then was then basically till this amendment has already been like lifted. Then you have the 19th Amendment, which is also about like the women's rights to vote here, because like after the Civil War, like even though like it basically gave the rights for all just like African American men that basically and then did slavery and give them a right to vote. However, even though though like men like Frederick Douglass did support both like the women right to vote and the African American men, the two Americans to vote, he basically mostly focused on like the African American to vote, and that's why Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Blackwell, who basically worked together to terms of like basically how to raise up and like basically give the women to basically to more rights to basically vote. That's why they basically later on protested and gave the to protest the government basically to give women the right to vote, which is later to the passage of this amendment here that was later brought into by Woodrow Wilson later on, like basically after like they basically the pretty much the end of World War I. And then you have the 20th Amendment, which is the presidential term and succession. And the 21st Amendment is to repeal the prohibition. 22nd Amendment is that like basically presidents can also only have like basically 2 terms, because like basically presidents like FDR had served them more than like 4 terms, like basically because the reason why he had that is basically because of like it's mostly about like basically helping of many people during around the Great Depression here, like applying a lot of new jobs, retired jobs, and as also as relying on basically on the economy and basically working them a lot more profitable, getting a lot of funds, and also being costing also through stocks, and that people can basically buy and purchase and basically get new jobs, and as well as also basically and through that this basically go through like his New Deal, like basically to where he speaks through his firesides where he basically tells them that they were the good working men, as well as also like others like women who gave also the work for like basically give boys like also hot lunches and so on and so forth. Even though like basically this solved a lot of things, however, it still discriminated also many African Americans, and also many of the Native Americans during around this time were not given like the right to purchase or sell any more of the, and not allowed to assert any acres of land during around this time. And it was also during that time that Franklin Roosevelt was also joining even though the U.S. was trying to keep themselves also neutral during the Second World War and trying to give all the supplies towards the Allied forces, even then, like until later when Japan had basically attacked the islands in Hawaii, which is in Pearl Harbor in December 7th, 1941, that the U.S. under Franklin D. Roosevelt then declared war later in the following day of December 8th, and then a few days later, Germany and Italy, then who are Japan's allies at that time, then declared war on the U.S. here, and that's why the U.S. had basically fought against Soviet in the islands, in the Pacific Islands, through against Japan before they went to war with also Italy and Germany. And Italy basically surrendered in 1943, way before Germany and Japan did. And that's wasn't until before Franklin D. Roosevelt died, and that's why he was succeeded by Harry Truman, who was later the one president who, during his term, would drop the bombs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and like later the signage in the USS Missouri that the Second World War had already ended. And so you have the 23rd Amendment, which is the presidential vote for persons in D.C., and you have 24th, which is there are no poll tax, and the 25th Amendment is presidential succession. The 26th Amendment gives now people especially young boys to basically have the right to vote at the age of 18. And finally, you have the 27th Amendment, which is the one in back in 1992, where basically that the U.S. basically has the compensation of members of Congress. And so let's go on. And I have another video of basically of why wasn't the Bill of Rights originally included into the U.S. Constitution before before December 15th of 1791. when they ratified it in 1789. I have this video. It's also by the TED Ed guys. So if you guys want to check this video out, I'll put the links into these videos in the description below here. And it was mostly basically about the Federalists and Anti-Federalists who championed over the different forms of basically powers of government here, as well as giving interior people the rights or basically the votes here, and the forms of different governments, as well as also it was also around that time that were debating also that after the American Revolutionary War, they should also basically gain a lot of more since they won the World War and that they won their independence from Great Britain. That they also basically need to gain their funds and gain their own money and from their own the country here and through livestock and agriculture and such. And but like men like Alexander Hamilton like basically supported the idea of establishing the first bank of the United States, angered like basically had a lot of beef so about the corruption and to say the powerful government with Thomas Jefferson around this time here and but they basically added that and it was all but it was also during that time where he also Alexander Hamilton put also a tax on the whiskey that basically many people were not happy about this tax and that they went to the whiskey rebellion of 1794 where they went 91 to 94 where that basically that were protest and revolted in around Pennsylvania, and that's why they sent George Washington to basically and his army and troops to then later then suppress this rebellion and so on and so forth, and guarantee the rights. And there was also during the time also that they were now getting more lands that that were during around the time of Western expansion here that they championed over many Native Americans, such as championed over the occupied territory of the northern or northwest of the Orleans territory, as well as going through going through around the southern and south part of the U.S. here. And yeah, so let's get to the next part. So, all right. So, why is the Constitution important here? So, here are the facts that I put out. So, first thing first, the establishment of government. That the Constitution establishes the structure of government, including the three branches, the relationship between the federal and the states' governments, and the process of electing also representatives. And the Constitution also protects the fundamental rights of U.S. citizens, such as the right to speak, practice the language, or protest, and also that the Constitution limits the government and prevents one branch of government from becoming too powerful that I mentioned before, and that the principles of Constitution have adopted by many of the democratic countries and the state counties and the race rights and evolved into also into many states too. And the durable document is also that the Constitution is a short document that has remained relevant despite the growth over into the U.S. population and territory. And so here I have two videos that are both that are again also by by the TED Ed, and these are about the making of the U.S. American Constitution. And there's also another one that I've not mentioned before. Is another about why is the U.S. Constitution like so hard to basically like to amend here because because now because we have like a total of like 27 amendments since 1992. So basically like the reason why I think it's also basically hard to amend is because like since like of Western expansion, that the U.S. has grown into a lot more of a bigger country. It's the last states being, Alaska and Hawaii that are officially become U.S. states back in 1959. That they basically, it's hard to amend because of like basically that it's basically hard to basically ratify through this amendment because to do this they have to like basically do if they want to basically amend constitutional amendment that they have to go through 2/3 of like basically the House and as well as 2/3 of like many states of the legislatures to basically also make a like a notification like radical to go through basically that the Constitution of the new amendment has to go through the process and to the notification and ratification here and as ratification as well as also that if the Constitution basically comes about in the process then it needs to like needs to go through a national congressional ratification, with being elected by many state delegates. But it's been really, really hard because it has to go through votes, or it's basically through amended by many of the different states into around the U.S. states, which became more and more possible, which leads to more of them states becoming unratified. And basically, also back then, like also the men had basically had also that the founders had also the issue of the when they passed the amendments. But then, like one time, Thomas Jefferson told James Madison that basically laws to basically kind of like expire within 19 years, or like, and there's also like we see like that basically like that the U.S. government basically has become that the U.S. government has basically become a lot more democratic now, and is one that it had been with the passage of amendments and back when it was but the forms of government have been back then into the different forms of government, and it has been on now have with the political, and also the forms of like the formations of also of the different political parties, which we now know today as both the Democratic and the Republican parties. So if you guys want to see more of these two videos here, I'll put those links in the description down below here. But let's move on. And so, what are the goals of the U.S. Constitution? It's to form like more of a, as is also mentioned in the Constitution, to form a perfect union, to establish the justice, to ensure the domestic tranquility, to provide the common defense, and to promote the general welfare, and to secure the blessings of liberty here. And that's all that basically that I've mentioned from before, the rights and guarantees for all people and all citizens. And finally, I will also have the two videos. One is from the Liberties episode, which is the final episode of the series, and the kids video history video that talks into more deep of if you guys need to learn more about the U.S. Constitution, either in U.S. history or in the U.S. government here. But I'll also put these links down into the description below if you guys want to learn more. But that's all the time we basically have. This is basically the it of my presentation here. But I hope you guys basically enjoyed it. I hope you guys basically either knew. Leave a comment down below and basically what you've learned new, like what's something interesting that you've learned, or like something related that's apart from the U.S. Constitution. And if you guys want to basically see more YouTube videos like this here, and see more history content, then what are you waiting for? Please be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you're new, don't forget to comment, and turn on the bell notifications. That way you can get notified by every video that I'll be posting in the channel. And yeah, I think that's pretty much about it. So I'll see you guys in my next video. So Mr. Aaron's out. Peace.